The air in the emergency room was a stale soup of antiseptic, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. It clung to the back of my throat, a taste I could never quite wash away, no matter how much cheap, bitter coffee I poured down it. 16 hours. I'd been on my feet for 16 hours, the soles of my worn-out sneakers screaming with every step on the merciless linoleum. My scrubs felt like a second skin, clammy and stiff, a testament to a shift that had started in daylight and was now bleeding into the deep, bruised hours of the next morning. All for a paycheck that would be devoured by rent and Lily's latest prescription before I even had a chance to feel its flimsy comfort in my hands. My locker clicked shut with a sound of finality, the thin metal door a flimsy barrier between the chaos of the hospital and the quiet desperation of my life. Outside, the world was dissolving. A storm, one the news had been breathlessly hyping for days, had finally broken its leash and was tearing through the city with vindictive fury. Rain didn't fall. It hammered against the windows in solid sheets, driven by a wind that howled like a wounded animal. I pulled my thin jacket tighter, a useless gesture against the bone-deep chill that had little to do with the weather. The bus schedule display flickered and died, announcing what I already knew. Service suspended. Every taxi app one opened showed the same mocking message, no cars available. A knot of pure, unadulterated panic tightened in my chest. It was a 3-mile walk to my apartment, a journey I couldn't imagine making in this deluge. All I wanted was my lumpy mattress, the familiar scent of my tiny apartment that always smelled faintly of old books and Lily's lavender soap. I slumped onto a hard plastic bench in the lobby, the exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing me down. My phone was nearly dead. One last, desperate attempt. A rideshare app one rarely used, one known for its surge pricing and questionable reliability. I put in the request, my thumb hovering over the button, knowing the cost would be another hole in my already sinking budget. Confirm. For a long moment, the little icon just spun, a perfect digital metaphor for my life. Then, impossibly, a ping. Your driver is on their way. Black sedan. For minutes. Relief washed over me, so potent it was dizzying. I stumbled outside, huddling under the meager protection of the hospital's entrance awning. The wind whipped my hair across my face, cold and wet. The streetlights cast long, shimmering reflections on the asphalt river that had once been the road. A car finally pulled up to the curb, but it wasn't the dented hybrid I expected. It was a ghost, a slice of impossible luxury gliding through the storm. Long, low, and impossibly black, its paint job so deep it seemed to drink the frantic light of the storm. It was the kind of car that belonged in a movie, not outside my run-down city hospital. The window, tinted to an opaque, menacing darkness, slid down with a whisper-quiet hum. The man inside wasn't the cheerful college student or weary part-time driver I was used to. He was carved from the same storm that raged around us. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, a severe jawline dusted with dark stubble. He wore a suit, tailored and dark, the fabric looking untouched by the chaos of the night. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were the color of storm clouds, a turbulent, slate gray that seemed to absorb all the light and reflect none of it back. They were ancient, weary, and utterly, terrifyingly intelligent. He looked at me, a quick, dismissive appraisal from my scuffed shoes to my exhausted face. "Get in," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It wasn't a request. My hand froze on the door handle. This was wrong. The app had a picture of a man named Dave, with a goofy grin and a golden retriever. This was not Dave. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake," I stammered, my words nearly snatched away by the wind. His gaze sharpened, a flicker of impatience in their gray depths. "Alara Vance. You are going to 214B, Elm Street. There is no mistake. Get in the car before you drown." Hearing him say my name, my address, sent a jolt of ice through my veins that had nothing to do with the rain. My desperation won out over my fear. I was too tired, too cold, too beaten down to argue. I pulled the heavy door open and slid into the passenger seat. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing us inside a capsule of unnerving silence and the rich scent of leather and something else, something clean and metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. The roar of the storm was instantly muted to a distant hum. We drove in silence, the city a blur of drowned lights and distorted shapes through the rain-streaked windows. The silence inside the car was heavier than the storm outside. It was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions. I stared straight ahead, my hands clenched in my lap, my nurse's brain cataloging details despite my fear. The flawless stitching on the leather dashboard. The weight of the air. The way he held the steering wheel with a relaxed, predatory stillness. And the small, dark stain on the cuff of his pristine white shirt, near his right hand. A drop of blood. My eyes snapped to his hand. There was a crude bandage wrapped around his palm, already soaking through. My professional instincts kicked in before I could stop them. "You're bleeding," I said, my voice sounding small and thin in the opulent quiet. He didn't look at me. His gray eyes remained fixed on the road. "I'm aware it needs to be cleaned and properly dressed. You could get an infection." I found myself reaching into my oversized work bag, my fingers closing around the familiar shape of an antiseptic wipe and a sterile gauze pad. It was reflex. "See a wound, treat a wound." "Leave it," he commanded, his voice sharp. But I was already holding the little packet out. "It will only take a second." If the cut is deep, a sudden, jarring lurch of the car threw me forward as he slammed on the brakes. A massive oak branch, ripped from its trunk by the wind, lay sprawled across the road, completely blocking our path. We were trapped. He swore, a low, vicious sound under his breath. He turned to me then, the full force of his attention a physical blow. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see the tension in his jaw, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He was in pain. My fear receded, replaced by the familiar, grounding certainty of my profession. "Let me see your hand," I said, my tone shifting, becoming the calm, authoritative voice I used with scared patience. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his eyes searching my face for something. I held his gaze, my own resolve hardening. I was a nurse. This is what I did. Finally, with a sigh that sounded more like a growl of frustration, he extended his hand. I took it gently, my fingers surprisingly steady as I unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The cut was deeper than I thought, a clean, surgical slice across his palm. It was already starting to look inflamed. "What happened?" I asked, tearing open the antiseptic wipe. The sharp smell of alcohol filled the small space. "An argument with a business associate," he said, his voice flat. He flinched slightly as I cleaned the wound, a crack in his granite facade. I worked quickly, my movements efficient and sure, applying the gauze and using the roll of medical tape from my bag to secure it. My fingers brushed against his, and his skin was shockingly warm. A current, sharp and unexpected, shot up my arm. I pulled back as if burned. He flexed his bandaged hand, his gaze fixed on my work. "You're competent," he stated, as if delivering a verdict. He looked at me again, his eyes lingering on my face. "Alara," he said, tasting the name. He reached out, his uninjured hand moving slowly, and brushed a stray, damp strand of hair from my cheek. His touch was featherlight, yet it branded my skin. It was a gesture of startling intimacy that felt more dangerous than any threat. I'll remember that the next few days were a blur of normalcy that felt utterly fake. I went to work, I checked on Lily, I paid a bill. But the memory of the storm, of the black car, and the man with eyes like thunderclouds was a constant, unsettling presence at the edge of my thoughts. I told myself it was a bizarre one-off event, a story I would maybe tell a friend one day, omitting the most terrifying parts. But I couldn't shake the feeling of his touch on my skin, or the weight of his final look. The illusion of normalcy shattered on a Thursday. I was leaving the hospital, the sun a pale, watery disk in the afternoon sky, when I saw it. The car. It was parked across the street, a sleek black Predator amidst a sea of ordinary vehicles. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned, ready to run back into the safety of the hospital, but a man blocked my path. He was older, with kind eyes set in a weathered face and a neatly trimmed gray beard. He wore a simple, dark suit, but he moved with the same quiet confidence as the man from the storm. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice polite but firm. "My name is Marcus. Mr. Costello would like a word Costello." The name meant nothing and everything. It was a name spoken in whispers in the darker corners of the city, a name associated with power, wealth, and a brand of ruthlessness that was the stuff of grim legend. Dante Costello. My blood ran cold. The man from the storm wasn't just some wealthy eccentric. He was him. "I have nothing to say to him," I managed, my voice trembling. Marcus's kind eyes filled with something akin to pity. "He is not asking, miss. He has a business proposition for you. One I think you will find compelling." He gestured towards the car. "He is a very persuasive man." The veiled threat hung in the air between us. I thought of Lily. I thought of my mountain of debt. I thought of the way Dante had looked at me, as if he already owned me. I had no choice. My feet felt like lead as I followed Marcus to the car, the world I knew shrinking with every step. This time, I was taken not to my apartment, but on a long, winding drive out of the city, ending at a set of towering iron gates that opened without a sound. We drove up a long, tree-lined driveway to a house that wasn't a house. It was a monument of glass and dark gray stone, a fortress of modern architecture nestled into the side of a hill, overlooking the distant, glittering city. It was beautiful, austere, and as welcoming as a prison. Marcus led me inside, through a cavernous hall with ceilings so high my footsteps echoed. The air was cool and still. There was no art on the walls, no family photos. Just space, light, and an overwhelming sense of controlled, silent power. He was waiting in a vast living area, a wall of glass showcasing the panoramic view. He stood from a low leather armchair, and I saw that he was leaning heavily on a cane. The suit was gone, replaced by simple black trousers and a gray cashmere sweater that did little to hide the rigid set of his shoulders or the tight lines of pain around his mouth. The wound on his hand was the least of his problems. "Miss Vance," Dante Costello said. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't given a choice," I retorted, a spark of defiance cutting through my fear. A corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. "No," he agreed. "You weren't." He gestured to a medical bag on a low glass table. "My doctor has been unavoidably detained. A disagreement with a business rival left me with a souvenir." He turned slightly, and I saw the dark stains spreading on the side of his sweater, just below his ribs. "A gunshot wound. I require a nurse. Someone competent, discreet, and trustworthy. Your file says you are the best surgical recovery nurse at City General. My own observation confirms your competence. Marcus has confirmed your discretion by investigating your life. You have no close friends, no romantic entanglements. Just a sister." He let that hang in the air. "My sister." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a cold, hard fact laid out between us. "And trustworthiness?" I asked, my voice tight. "That," he said, his storm gray eyes locking onto mine, "is what you are here to prove." He then named a sum of money that made the air leave my lungs. It was enough to pay off all my debt, to cover Lily's medical care for the rest of her life, to buy us a small house far away from here. It was an impossible, life-altering amount. "You will stay here. You will tend to my injury. You will ask no questions. When I am healed, the money will be transferred to an account of your choosing, and you will forget you ever met me. Do we have an agreement?" It was the devil's bargain, a gilded cage offered by a man who was both my captor and my potential savior. I looked at his pale face, at the pain he was trying so hard to conceal, and then I thought of Lily's face, her smile that had been so rare lately. Resignation settled over me, heavy as a shroud. "Yes," I said. "We have an agreement." The days that followed fell into a strange, surreal rhythm. The mansion was my world now. I slept in a guest suite that was larger than my entire apartment, with silk sheets and a bathroom carved from marble. But the door locked from the outside. I was a well-cared-for prisoner. My sole purpose was Dante. Twice a day, I would go to his private suite to clean and dress the wound in his side. He was a terrible patient. He was terse, impatient, and fought my every instruction. He hated the vulnerability, hated being dependent on anyone, especially me. "You need to rest," I'd tell him, My voice clipped with professionalism as I replaced a bandage. "The stitches will tear if you keep moving around like this. I have work to do," he would grind out, his jaw tight with pain as he tried to sit up. "Your work can wait." "Your body can't." I would press him back against the pillows with a firm hand on his shoulder, ignoring the jolt that went through me every time I had to touch him. We existed in a state of forced, clinical intimacy. I saw him at his weakest, stripped of his armor of power and tailored suits. I saw the web of old scars that crisscrossed his torso, a roadmap of a violent life. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. And he, in turn, saw me. He watched me with that unnerving, analytical gaze as I worked. He noticed the slight tremor in my hands on the first day, the way I chewed on my lower lip when I was concentrating. One evening, I brought him his pain medication and a glass of water. He was sitting by the vast window, staring out at the city lights. "They look like scattered jewels from up here," I said quietly, setting the items on the table beside him. "They're just lights," he said, not looking at me. "Each one a life. A struggle. A debt." He finally turned his head, his gray eyes seeming to look right through me. "You grew up in the foster system. Your parents died in a car accident when you were 10. You put yourself through nursing school, working 2 jobs, while also acting as legal guardian for your younger sister after she was diagnosed with a degenerative autoimmune disorder at 16. You owe over $80,000 in medical and student loan debt. The landlord of your building is threatening eviction." The clinical recitation of my life's tragedies felt like a series of physical blows. I felt exposed, violated, laid bare. "You had me investigated," I whispered, my voice raw. "I investigate everyone," he corrected, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "It's how I survive." I needed to know who was in my house. With their hands on my life, he paused, his gaze unwavering. "Your file told me you were desperate. But it didn't tell me you would meet the eyes of a man bleeding in a car and not look away." In that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. I wasn't just a hired nurse or a convenient pawn anymore. I was someone he had chosen, someone he had seen. The fear that had been my constant companion began to curdle into something far more complex and dangerous, a dawning, terrifying understanding. As his body healed, the tension in the house grew. Marcus was a constant, grim presence, his phone calls always conducted in low, urgent tones. The reason for Dante's disagreement was a rival named Petrov, a man whose reputation for brutality made even Dante seem tame. And somehow I was now part of their war. "Petrov knows a new nurse is here," Marcus explained one afternoon, his kind eyes filled with worry as he found me in the library. "He doesn't know who you are, but he sees you as a weakness. A potential leverage point." The gilded cage suddenly felt very, very thin. Later that night, Dante summoned me to his study. He was on his feet, the cane gone, his movements still stiff, but filled with a renewed sense of coiled energy. "Petrov is making his move," he said without preamble. "He's gotten sloppy. He's trying to find you, to get to me through you. We're going to let him think he's succeeded." My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "What are you going to do?" "What we are going to do," he corrected. His plan was simple and terrifying. They had intel that one of Petrov's men was going to try to contact a disgruntled former employee of Dante's, looking for information on me. They had the man in custody. I was to take his place. "You will get a call," Dante explained, his voice a low, steady anchor in my sea of fear. "You will pretend to be this man. You will confirm you know the nurse. You will agree to sell information. All you have to do is keep him on the line long enough for us to trace the call to its source. Can you do that, Alara?" He held my gaze, and in his eyes I saw not a command, but a question. He was asking for my help. He was trusting me. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The waiting was the worst part. I sat in the silent study, a burner phone cold and heavy in my hand. Dante stood by the window, a motionless silhouette against the city lights. Marcus and 2 other men, grim-faced and armed, were phantoms in the shadows. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind, made me jump. I thought about my old life, the predictable exhaustion of the hospital, the simple worry of an unpaid bill. It seemed a lifetime away, a world I could no longer return to. I had crossed a threshold the night I got into that car. The phone buzzed, a violent, jarring sound that made me gasp. I looked at Dante. He gave a single, sharp nod. I took a breath and answered. The voice on the other end was gravelly suspicious. I played my part, my nursing skills coming to the fore, the ability to project calm, to lie with a steady voice to a dying patient's family. I negotiated, I feigned greed, I kept him talking. My eyes were locked on Dante, who watched me with an intensity that burned. After an eternity that was probably only 3 minutes, Marcus gave a subtle hand signal. The trace was complete. "I'll call you back with a location," I said, my voice only trembling slightly as I ended the call. The moment the line went dead, the room exploded into quiet, efficient action. Dante turned from the window, his face a mask of cold fury. "It's time to end this," he said to Marcus. He walked over to me, stopping so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "You were brilliant," he murmured, his voice for me alone. "Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." He leaned in and pressed his lips to my forehead, a brief, searing brand of possession and promise. Then he was gone. The hours he was gone were the longest of my life. The vast, silent mansion became a tomb. I paced the study, my mind a whirlwind of terrifying images. I replayed every conversation, every touch, every look that had passed between us. I had tended to his wounds, and in doing so, had become entangled in the very violence that caused them. I was terrified for him, a realization that struck me with the force of a physical blow. The fear was no longer for myself. Just before dawn, I heard the sound of the car on the gravel driveway. I ran to the door, my heart in my throat, fumbling with the lock. He stood on the threshold, backlit by the pale morning light. He was exhausted, his suit jacket gone, his sleeve torn. There was a fresh bruise blooming on his cheekbone, but he was standing. He was alive. He stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind him. The air was thick with the scent of the cold night, of metal, and of victory. Petrov was no longer a threat. He walked past me without a word and went to the great window, staring out as the sun began to rise over the city. The external threat was gone. The agreement was fulfilled. I was free. "Marcus will transfer the money this morning," Dante said, his back still to me. "He will drive you back to your apartment. You can return to your life. No one will ever bother you or your sister again." "I give you my word." I stood there, the silence stretching between us. I thought about my cramped apartment, the squeak of the floorboards, the constant, grinding worry. I thought about the life that money would buy me, a life of safety, of security, of normalcy. A life without him. A life that suddenly felt empty, colorless. The choice he was offering was a return to the quiet misery I had been so desperate to escape. This place, this dangerous, violent world, had been terrifying. But in it, I had felt more alive than I had in years. I had felt seen. I had felt protected. I walked slowly towards him, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. I stopped just behind him. He didn't turn. I reached into the pocket of my scrubs, my fingers closing around a small first aid kit I now carried everywhere. I pulled out an antiseptic wipe. "You're hurt," I said softly. He finally turned, his storm gray eyes filled with a raw, unguarded emotion I couldn't name. He looked from my face to the wipe in my hand. 1,000 questions and answers passed between us in that silent look. He didn't have to ask. He already knew my decision. I reached up and gently touched the wipe to the bruise on his cheek. He closed his eyes, a shudder passing through his powerful frame. He was letting me in. He was letting me care for him. This was my choice. Not a surrender, but an acceptance. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, a nurse dragged into the underworld. I was a woman choosing her place, her person. My old life was gone. My new one was terrifyingly uncertain, fraught with danger and shadows. But as the sun crested the horizon, flooding the room with golden light, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally home.